Sweet. All right, start again.
Okay, hi, my name is Natalia James. I'm a psychologist. I've been working in clinical practice for over 10 years now. I deal with a lot of patients that experience depression, anxiety, and stress. Last year, I addressed the United Nations in Geneva with doctors from UK, doctors from United Arab Emirates, and we were just talking about the mental health system in New South Wales and other health systems around the world. And basically everyone was actually outlining what government assistance for mental health was actually being given across all countries, especially during the pandemic, the COVID pandemic in 2020. I think it was just really important for people to become more aware of mental health. I've noticed that for a long time there's been like a very strong stigma and biases as well in relation to not seeking help when they actually need assistance, what kind of assistance is available, why it's important to also be mentally healthy and look after your well-being. And there are really good systems set up in United Kingdom and in Dubai. I do believe we were a little bit behind in New South Wales, especially. I don't believe that we had I don't believe we had access to really good resources in comparison to the rest of the world. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, cool. That's really interesting. I feel like we could talk about that. Or you mentioned yesterday you've been like having a lot of realizations and a lot of growth in just like, in these areas. So is there any, like, what's been happening for you recently?
Especially during the lockdown, what I found is like a lot of my friends were reaching out, and the main concern was relationships.
Yeah.
And so everyone that was calling were pretty much having either troubled relationships or getting to know someone, and there were lots of things going on. And the theme that I picked up across the board for everyone was basically that there was a lot of fear, a lot of angst, and an intolerance of uncertainty. And people find that really difficult to deal with, especially in relationships. And if you really think about it as well, on one level or many levels, we deal with uncertainty daily.
Yeah.
But it's more with the uncertainty that's been highlighted is actually in relationships. It's how do you feel secure in a relationship, or how do you create some type of certainty when you feel that the person you're getting to know or your partner has one foot in and one foot out.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So I feel like we could go into that. Yeah, I don't know, for me, that is the thing I struggle with the most, is in relationships. I was telling you the other day that like I was seeing this girl and I had an anxiety attack. But I was anxious the whole time, but it kind of just like got to an anxiety attack. And I'm the type of person who, like, I have my methods of dealing with uncertainty, that I develop, that I like have been developing, and they're still not perfect because I still get to points where I'm feeling very anxious, and I'm starting to realize, like, for example, last week I was really anxious on like Tuesday or something, And my brain, it got like in my brain, there's a lot of things going on at once. And a lot of my anxiety is accompanied with like confusion, like kind of just so many different thoughts. Um, and it's just kind of overwhelming, and it manifests as like stress and anxiety. And something that helped me like the other day, like that I've been developing, but it also, it really shortened the length of that real anxiety like attack as such, um, was like asking myself, what are the, like, usually I find there's a couple of things that are really like bothering me where my brain is like, because you mentioned safety, and that's what I think anxiety is. It's like, and then the flight or fight response is triggered because we genuinely feel unsafe.
Right.
Um, and I guess the level of that feeling of unsafety or the perceived threat, the more that is perceived to be a very dangerous threat to, like, life, or well, now it's, back in the day it was like a lion, but like let's say a lion was there, your brain would perceive that as maybe a 10 out of 10 threat versus a something that's scary but is not as scary as a lion. For example, a big thunderstorm and like an intense weather attack. Maybe you respond, and therefore the anxiety is higher and the stress levels are higher. And I find that getting to the source of what is like the deepest stressor that is causing this anxiety attack is very helpful, because I feel like once you clear up that, or I feel like the rest of, like, usually I find that I have a lot of anxieties at one time, but the other anxieties are there because my body is already and my brain is already in a fear mode, and so everything else is being perceived through that fear lens. And so all of a sudden there's like one or two major fears, and then I'm in a fear mode, and then I perceive everything as scary, and all of a sudden I've got like 50 anxieties, so I have to go back to those original ones. And so I was just saying that because the other day, like, I did that. I identified what were the two or three like things that I was genuinely afraid of, and I feel like, and I realized that those were all things about the future that I was uncertain about, but at the same time could be rationalized, and they were irrational, and they were, um, not very like warranted for the situation. So you were saying it's about uncertainty and in relationships, and I find that that is huge. Like, all my anxieties, I'm starting to notice, are about uncertainty, and the fear of the future or something important not happening or happening. So yeah.
So
uh,
I think on two levels, like it's really important. Um, the first thing, and it was interesting that you mentioned the fight or flight response is actually activated in terms of a life-threatening situation. And then when you're dealing with everyday trivial life events, it's really important. And this all goes back to perception, because what I find is that a lot of patients or a lot of people um, experience anxiety uh, due to their lack of perceived perception. You know, what is a life-threatening situation?
mhm.
What is an everyday trivial life event? And what I
Yes.
find is that everyone is really acting out as on a 10 for
Yeah.
trivial life problems. So perception is really, really important. Is, you know, anxiety is very appropriate. It's very functional when you're facing real life danger, because it
Yeah.
allows you to escape the danger and get you
Yeah.
perceived safe. But if you're having an anxiety attack because you're running late to a meeting, or someone didn't
Mm,
get back to you, or
mm,
those type of everyday events, then that's when it becomes unhealthy, because
yeah.
purely when you're experiencing anxiety at that level, and you believe that it is a perceived threat and your life is in danger, you've got to also understand your body's also experiencing intense physiological emotions, which ultimately are very unhealthy,
Yes,
right?
100%.
So on that level, um, it needs to be really understood, what is a life-threatening situation and what is an everyday trivial problem.
Can I, yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like, so the techniques that I use, I do, if I'm experiencing anxiety, I will, um, one of the techniques I use is just like stating the facts of the situation. And like when I see the facts, like, or asking myself what's the worst thing that can happen, asking very rational questions and answering them in a very rational way, I find that my brain naturally will have another perspective on what I'm going through. And just through presenting more rational thoughts, like it will naturally recognize that this is not a life threatening situation and it will calm down. But I think what keeps that there to some extent, which is something I feel like I would very much benefit if I was able to do more skillfully, would be um, it's not just the brain's natural. Yeah, I feel like it's not just the brain's natural response to something it perceives as life threatening that um, anxiety is brought up. So that is a natural response of the brain, and it's going to happen whether we like it or not. We can't change that. That's in our biology and our DNA, that fear response to something that is perceived as a threat. But at the same time, I think what holds it in place for longer or keeps us stuck um, in that kind of in that habit of really being anxious all the time is a sense that anxiety is the appropriate response, because on a subconscious level, I think we see it all around us. Um, and so, for example, if you were running late for a meeting, um, you might not know or believe or have any sense of possibility that there is any other option but to respond with anxiety. Like that seems like, okay, I'm running late. Like I I've responded anxiously so many times to that I think that's just the normal way of responding. And therefore I can't change that because that is how things work. I should respond anxiously. That is appropriate because I've done it so many times, but also I've seen it around me so many times. Um, not challenging that, because I truly believe that we can um, choose. Like the deeper we go into ourselves and we understand our responses to things, we can choose. Like we could program our brain to respond instead of anxiously like that. We could program our brain to respond with laughter, for example. It'd be fucking hard because we've been doing that for so long, and our brain is, a computer that is of habits, and it gets stronger with habits. So it'd be very hard. But I feel like fundamentally, we can change our responses to things. But I think that the big thing is the belief that this response is normal, appropriate, is who I am. So do you, firstly, does that make sense? Did you follow that?
There's just some things I'd like to point out. So if someone is running late to a meeting, for example, um, and that level of angst or that level of anxiety is precipitated, and you keep going with that because you see it as something that's quite normal when it actually isn't, because as I mentioned earlier, anxiety is very appropriate and functional only when facing real life danger, because it allows you to escape the danger.
So how do we know that? How do we know that it's only that is its Purpose.
That's its purpose, and that's why it's called the flight or fight part of
Yes,
the
but that still
brain.
doesn't prove it. That still doesn't prove it.
Yeah, research, yeah, but according to like lots of research, that primitive part of the brain
Yeah.
is when it's activated, it's part of the survival mode because you have your sympathetic nervous system that fires off when you're in real life danger. When you actually get yourself to a very safe place, your parasympathetic nervous system then starts to calm down the body,
Hmm.
right? So it's also really important, especially when you talk about belief, there's always a very strong narrative that's going to keep you in that anxiety. The narrative is always going to precede your physiological responses and how you actually behave. So if you're running
Yeah.
late to a meeting, and that's something that you actually can't change. You can't change the traffic. You can't change the reasons why. You're actually just running late. You actually need to
Hmm.
change the narrative because you can't change anything external of you. You've got no control over that. And the only real true control that you actually have is controlling your thoughts.
Hmm.
So it's your beliefs and your
Yeah.
thoughts that you ascribe to the actual event that precedes how you actually feel and how you deal with the situation,
Yeah.
right?
That
So
makes sense. Yeah.
running late to work, for example, if we look at it on a scale of 1 to 10, so 10 being life-threatening, 1 being a trivial life problem, again, we go back to perception. And this is why it's really important to place things into perception. And you know, saying something like your narrative can sound something like, you know, this is a trivial life event and I'm choosing to put this into perspective. And the perspective is that a trivial life issue, it's not a life-threatening situation, so I don't need to act as if I'm about to die.
It's funny, like what comes to mind then is so when you're anxious or when I'm anxious, like I feel like if I really ask myself, what do I want to do right now? I feel like there's a sense of me that would say, just based on how my physiological responses are, um, somewhere in me would be like, fuck, I'd love to go for a run. Like, because there's just this tenseness and the muscles are contracting and all that kind of stuff. Like, um, of course, there'd be other responses to that, but like, in terms of if you tapped in, I think if I tapped into my body is like in a mode to like move and very erratically and intensely because my muscles are all tensed. I've got this like it's almost like adrenaline, and that's the response.
Stress hormone. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, but like if, for example, you were running late for a meeting and there was an option to run to the meeting because that like would solve the problem and would be a use of your anxiety, like the response would allow you to run to the meeting. um, if that was like an option that you perceived as a really good option to like not be late anymore to get to somewhere faster, then um, that might be an appropriate, you know, response of anxiety and maintained anxiety. I guess it would help you get there faster. But I guess maybe in the majority of times, like if you're just in traffic, you could ask yourself, you know, you probably wouldn't, but like you could ask yourself, um, you know, should I run there? And if your brain's like, no, I shouldn't, then, you know, there really isn't uh, an adaptive use of that anxiety. Like, you know, if you're just sitting in a car.
But you can use alternative strategies. So even just deep breathing,
Yeah.
right? So even though you want to use physical capacity to help bring down your anxiety, but there's other tools that you can actually use, and breathing is one of them. But it's also very important to acknowledge and be consciously aware of what it is that you are thinking, because the
Yeah,
narrative needs to change.
that's it. And I'm the type of person where if I question everything, I overthink everything. So if you were to tell me, okay, it's not adaptive, it's anxiety is not useful in this situation, so you should change a narrative. I find it very hard to just do that. But
Mm.
by going through questions like, you know, I don't know exactly what they would be, but that's what I was trying to allude to there. It's like if I ask myself, okay, you know, I'm feeling anxious, could I run to the thing? And then my brain was like, no, that's not actually like I'd actually rather be here. Then I would have an easier time changing the narrative to be um, like just seeing factually that it is not useful to have this response is and to keep the narrative going around, like tricking my brain by because I think the reason the narrative keeps on going for a lot of people is because they genuinely believe the narrative should be there at some level. I think.
But also, I think people stay in that state of anxiety or angst because they believe it's going to change something. But it
Yes.
actually isn't. It's not going to change the fact that you're running late.
Yes, but I think somewhere in you might be like, because we're so used to using like responding anxiously to things and like I hear sometimes people say, you know, um, if I wasn't stressed about something, I wouldn't get it done. Like sometimes I think we correlate anxiety with benefit because it helps us to, like, I know for me, I feel kind of anxious a lot of the time and it pushes me to like be more and do more and like think about things more. And I justify that.
Yeah, but that almost says that I need to be in a constant state of impulsivity in order for me to actually do something, right? But you don't need to be in an impulsive state because having that fight or flight part of your brain activated naturally allows you to be quite impulsive. So you
Mm-hmm.
act, right? Because you're scared
Yeah,
of danger.
true.
But when you're changing narrative
Mm,
or when you're doing deep breathing,
mm.
you actually need to be not impulsive. It's
Yep.
conscious movement. I'm consciously aware that my narrative is negative. I'm consciously aware that I'm experiencing physiological symptoms that are ultimately unhealthy,
Mm,
right? I'm also aware that no matter how much anxiety I'm experiencing, it's not going to change the fact that I'm late to this meeting. It's not going to
mm,
change the actual outcome. So I'm going to choose to get there in a more positive or neutral stance rather than a negative stance with, you know, the fear and anxiety and so forth. And again, just with that narrative, a person who is running late to a meeting could have a very strong narrative saying, I'm late for this meeting, this is terrible, I'm a terrible person, I'm going to get fired. So again, see that narrative is really, really feeding that fear.
yeah.
But none of that is actually true. And that's where you can go into things like fears or facts. Is
Yeah.
it a fear
Yeah.
or is it a fact? Well, it
Yeah.
can't be a fact because you're not there yet. So you don't know if you're going to get fired or not.
Yes, exactly.
Right? So
Yeah.
that gets wiped out. And the only thing that you have to deal with is the present moment. Again, being consciously aware and being very present in that moment rather than getting caught up in, you know, what I refer to as, you know, the imagination, the camaraderie of the imagination. Because really,
Mm,
when you're in a state of anxiety and you have all these fears, you're creating all these negative self-defeating scenarios, and that's not
mm-hmm.
healthy either. So you're not really reacting to the reality that's presented, you're really just reacting to your imagination.
Mm,
It's also impossible to deal with something that actually hasn't happened.
mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
happened in your mind, but it actually hasn't happened in reality. So when you're trying to deal with something that's happened in your mind, it's
Mm.
really impossible. You can't do that.
Yeah.
It hasn't happened. It actually doesn't exist. It's got no platform. It's got no plateau.
But the fact of life is we can plan for things, and we should, like, yeah, there's that fine line, because if you go about and you don't plan anything, like there is a fact of life that planning is beneficial. So I think it's like, how would you recommend the brain should distinguish between, for me, it's like I rationally have to think about, okay, is this something worth planning beforehand? Or is this one of those things from experience that I know is actually better addressed in the moment? You wouldn't not plan for a meeting at work because, I don't know, I feel and sometimes I feel anxious, and planning is the thing that helps me. But I guess you're saying that if you're doing that all the time, it's inappropriate as well. So how do you distinguish between those, whether it's appropriate or not?
Yeah, look, it's not inappropriate, but it's how a person acts in relation to an actual event. Because every event is really neutral in and of itself, but it's only your beliefs or your thoughts that you ascribe to that event that actually makes the difference. Now, I'm not saying that planning is not good and or it's not bad. It's not really about the planning, right? Because being organized is also really important and also part of life, because being orderly also creates a level of predictability.
Yep.
Hence why a lot of people who do experience a lot of anxiety or a lot of angst, they like things that are quite structured, and they want to know what they're actually dealing with. They're really looking for the sure thing, right?
Yeah,
And only go with the sure thing. But how many things in life are not the sure thing? And so
exactly.
there is,
That's the trick.
yeah, but there is that uncertainty. And if you really think about it, for example, the biggest uncertainty that everyone deals with on a day-to-day basis, and perhaps without even realizing, is that, well, you're not promised the next day, and you're not promised the next minute of your life. You actually don't know what's going to happen, but you automatically on your own have developed a tolerance for that uncertainty, that you can plan to go meet with your friends the next day, or you can plan your week of work, but you're actually not guaranteed. You don't know if you're going to be here or actually not. And I know it's an awful example, but I think it's
No.
an important one because it highlights such an important aspect of life. And it also highlights that, in a way, everyone does have this very high level of intolerance to uncertainty.
So I think with that, like, one of the ways I would say that tolerance builds, or that doesn't become an actual anxiety, the whole will I wake up tomorrow, is the fact that, and I feel like it very much links to why people have anxiety. So the thing that, makes that kind of part of life not anxious, like anxiety ridden, is because we've had so much evidence that we will be here the next day. Like, for example, me, I'm 29 years old. I've woken up every day the next day. So my brain's like, okay, that's probably, like, on a very deep level, it's just confirming the fact that it's not going to happen. But I think with, like, people who are anxious, they're anxious about something. And the fact that they are anxious, it actually, and the thing is, the anxiety develops later in life. We've been experiencing that proof that we are going to wake up from the moment we were born, right? Every single day we have woken up. But the thing is, like, later in life, if you start to develop an anxiety, say you're 5, let's say you're 15, whatever it is, and then you start to, the thing is, when you're anxious about something, your brain chemistry and the way you perceive things in your mind, it's not clear anymore. And a lot of the time those things actually do come true, because you're anxious and you're not, you're not thinking rationally and blah, blah, blah. And then there starts to be this spiral of evidence that that anxiety is true and it's something I have to be anxious about. And it just kind of reinforces itself, just like the um, the anxiety is quashed that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow because the proof, the physical world has enforced that that's wrong. So it kind of happens in an opposite direction, I think, a lot with anxiety.
But that's a person conditioning their mind, right? And if we take it back to when you're really young, look, anxiety comes from the fear of the unknown, right? Mainly, okay? And that's what people become really anxious about. Is it going to work out? Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really, really important to feel really safe in any environment, in any situation. So if you take anxiety back to your childhood, it's because there was a time where you felt really unsafe and very fearful of being really vulnerable. And that's where it's actually conditioned, because you have people who have a fear of abandonment. So if they experience this in childhood, later on in life, you find that they have commitment issues and they can't commit to things because they have a fear that whatever they're committing to is going to let them down. So they let it go or let it down before that. And that's because they have an intense fear of it not happening, it not being real enough. I can't tolerate the uncertainty. I need to know, I need to have evidence, or I need to feel very secure.
Yeah.
So this is how a person starts to condition their mind. You know, you say, I'm 29 years old, I've woken up, you know, the last 29 years of my life. So now I'm conditioned to believe that I'm going to wake up every other day of my life, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's now become part of your brain that you've actually conditioned. That belief now you've actually conditioned, where you feel very safe, and it gives you the ability to be quite vulnerable.
Sure.
Right? But it's only some things that you actually highlight, and they're the things that you actually fear.
So how does someone decondition their like bring it back to before, the relationship issues
Well,
that you were just mentioning?
the most important thing is to really recognize, is this a problem for me? Is there a recurring pattern? Am I seeing something that's quite consistent? So a person who has commitment issues will have relationships, and then they'll either end prematurely, or, you know, they'll be in a state of angst. And it's not that they can't prolong with the relationship. It's not that that person is bad for them. It just means that they can't deal with the anxiety, and it's much easier to really walk away. Okay, because then once you walk away, then there goes the anxiety. There's no more fear, there's no more uncertainty, and then that person can go along back to their life in areas where they are certain, right? And where they are going to thrive, because that makes someone feel really empowered as well. Right? And people always thrive off that type of self-empowerment, that, hey, this is a sure thing. But, you know, that relationship over there, yeah, that's not for me, because that just gives me so much anxiety and so much fear, and they can't be their true self.
Yep.
Right?
Ooh, I can relate to that. I can relate to
It's
that.
also really important to recognize patterns and triggers. It's really, really, really important. And what that actually, you know, it does stem back from childhood, because you have to remember your first relationship is with your parents.
Yep.
So that sets the foundation. You know, you look at, what was my relationship like with my family? What was it like with my parent? What were my experiences? Because you need to remember that, you know, from age 0 to 7, you've got no conscious mind.
Yeah.
So your subconscious mind is just really taking on board pretty much everything. And if you experience that some type of abandonment or some type of abuse or some type of trauma,
Sure.
your brain is actually going to register that.
Yes. And deep down, very deep down, because it's all subconscious stuff.
Correct. And then
Yeah.
later on in life, you're going to just keep projecting that. And that might come up in your lack of commitment with work or studies or in a relationship or friendships, right? It can actually affect, you know, many different parts of your life. So it's really important to really look within.
And do what? And do what? When you look within,
when
how do
you
you?
look within, you're aiming a focus on yourself, right? Because anxiety is really the fear of the unknown, and I have no control of
Yeah.
what is to actually happen, right?
Yeah.
So individuals tend to focus a lot, and I find this, they really focus a lot on things that they can't control, right? So
Yeah.
it's all external. So when you focus on things that you can't control, especially the external things, that makes you feel really powerless.
Yeah.
So to counteract that, you need
Yeah.
to actually look within, because
Right.
you can control yourself, get to know yourself, and control the
Mm.
things that you say and do and think and feel and all the rest of it.
Mm.
And that makes you feel really powerful, because you always want to be feeling in a very empowered state. Because as we were saying before, that a person thrives when they have like a sure thing. So you need to be that sure thing for yourself,
Yes.
right?
That's good.
And then letting go, you know, letting go of the false idea that I've got control over things, but you actually don't. And it's false. It's a lie. It's like an
Mm.
illusion. People tell themselves I've got control over things. So I'm really gonna focus on that, and I'm gonna change that. And these are my expectations that go with it, and it's going
Mm.
to work. And then when it doesn't, that person
Mm.
falls into a state of angst or panic or worry or confusion. Why didn't it work? Disappointed because the expectations were not met as well. So there's lots of things that are actually going on just in relation to that idea, that false premise that I have control over external things or people.
So don't you think that that false premise is also one of the things that develop in those, like from birth on those early stages? So
Most
people hold on to that belief. I mean, I do, because it's the only way that they've ever operated. So how do you start to move that in a healthy direction towards that truth that you're trying to talk about? And it's the same with those false narratives of that are causing the abandonment stuff and the relational stuff. They're so subconscious. How do you start to move it in the right direction?
in that sense, you need to remember. So the primary title would be that person has an intense need for control.
Yep.
If that person has an intense need for control, what their actual belief is, if I have control over everything, that's when I feel safe. That's the underlying belief. I'm only happy when I can control everything and know everything, and I feel safe when I have that, right?
Mm.
So even that in itself, that is really false.
Mm.
So you need to change that, because again, if that's been taken on the subconscious mind and that's been archived in long-term memory, and your subconscious is actually projecting that, you're really running off, you know, very old information. Or
So you're saying it's wrong, it's a wrong narrative from a factual perspective? What is the evidence that it's wrong?
most definitely, because you don't have control over things.
So just give me some evidence for that.
Yeah, you don't have control over people.
Right.
So for example, if you know yeah, just for example, that
Take me for an example.
okay,
Did you have control over me today?
not at all, and you
Yeah.
don't have control over me either.
Right. You woke up. I have no idea what you did.
Right, but that's yeah, but that's not or even like in a sense, we're in a relationship, right? So
Yeah.
two people are in a relationship and one person likes the other one a lot more and it's not reciprocated on the same level. And then one wants commitment and the other person actually doesn't. You actually can't control that.
Yeah, because the way I try to come to those factual realizations that I can't control someone else is the fact that, okay, this person is like you, for example, you grew up with completely different parents to me in a completely different house to me. You would have had completely different experiences and completely different thoughts to me. I can just imagine that you are so different to me. I think there's a big sense that like everyone should be thinking what I'm thinking. You know what I
Correct.
mean? Like
Correct.
everyone, um, but I feel like there's so many permutations of thoughts and personalities and how they've developed that I reckon it'd be funny to actually be inside of your self and see that you are so different to me. Like I think because we all kind of feel like a sense of connection because we're all very similar, but we're so different. I bet you.
Correct. And that's when I go back, if we go back to that point of perception, because you're seeing something from your own experience and your own reality. So you can only talk from that view. But someone else could be looking at the same thing. And because they've had different life experiences and come from something different, their perception is also going to be different.
Yeah.
So
So
it
how
is
do we use
all
that?
about
How do we
perception.
use that fact? How do we use that fact to start moving in that correct direction? And facts are like that.
You need to, that's when I say when you really need to look within and have a deep introspection. You know, what are my beliefs? What are
Sure.
my deep thoughts? Because that's where it all starts. Because once you change your thought, I'll give you an example. So let's just say someone's having a really good day and everything's really working out, right? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a thought a thought comes in, and it's a negative thought, and it's a thought, oh, I just remembered what I said to my work colleague at such and such, and it makes you feel like cringe, right? It's not the situation and it's not the event because that's in the past. It's the actual thought that made you feel that cringe. And it's only
Hmm.
a thought, but people take on thoughts and beliefs as something that's really real and something that's really tangible and actually react to it. But if someone was to say, okay, well, I did have that thought, right? Because you can't stop yourself from thinking, right? But if you just observe that thought and say, oh, that was a terrible time, or I felt really embarrassed that time, and you just let it go, then
See,
it's
I
okay.
find, yeah, but for me, just being aware of the thought, I need to do something more. For me, it's like challenging a thought
You can
within.
either reframe the thought,
Yep.
right? You can rationalize it.
Yep.
You
So
can,
how would you do that as an example for that situation with the person at work thinking about the work situation? Let's talk about reframing. Let's talk about rationalization. How would that work within your mind?
so if you were to reframe that thought, or you'd need to understand what you're saying to yourself in relation to that. So if you thought, um, she or he must think I'm really stupid, right? And then they're going to tell everyone that I'm really stupid. And then that means everyone's going to judge me, right? And
Hmm.
primarily, when you actually judge or criticize yourself, you actually believe that everyone else is doing it. And it's actually an arrogant stance because you're not on everyone's mind every minute of the day, right?
Yes.
So that's how someone actually runs away with their thoughts. So you need to rationalize, as in, you know, is it true or is it just my assumption? Just because I judge myself, does that mean everyone else is judging me? Because I'm not a mind reader. I can't really read what's in someone's mind.
The
I know,
fact is that I've never read a single thought of yours.
yeah,
I've never heard a thought in your head. So that's a fact.
yeah. And another fact is, you can draw on the point of, well, did he or she tell me that they think I'm stupid? No.
No, but some people think because they do it themselves that they think negative things about other people and therefore, and they don't tell them. So therefore that person might be thinking it, not telling me. So that's not proof that she's not thinking that.
But it's also an assumption. And again, just because you look at yourself in that way, you think everyone else does. And
Yep.
that's not true.
So that's a fact. Yeah, that's a fact that you could bring up the fact that I remember yesterday I had that thought about myself in that exact same way. And it is likely that I am thinking that person is thinking in the exact same way as me because I remember that thought and that is how I usually think about myself. And I think everyone thinks the same way as I do. But then you could also like challenge that and be like, how do I know that everyone thinks the same way that I do? Like, for example, you've grown up in a completely different household. I think in the way that I do because of the way, my parents think and speak and kind of I'm obviously my own self, but I've adopted those things. But you've been with completely different people in a completely different culture. You might have grown up with mute parents, for example. It's possible. And you might not have picked up so many ways of speaking and thinking and stuff like that. That's a possibility. I actually don't know the exact scenarios you were in.
Yeah, but a person doesn't need to go that deep because then that's how someone gets really lost down the rabbit hole.
Yeah,
All,
that's what I do sometimes. Like, so how do you do that more effectively and efficiently?
yeah, all it really is that when you're really looking at the facts, it's looking at them in a really clean way. Is it true? Yes or no? It's not true. That person didn't say that they believe or think that I'm stupid.
But what about a serial overthinker?
And that begs that question, do I think that I am stupid? Yes, I do think that I am stupid. So then that person needs to, again, really look within, right? Because their self-esteem has been affected, their self-confidence has been affected, they have a poor self-perception, and they're the things that need working on. You see, the problem isn't in the world. It's not out there. That's quite neurotic, right? The problem needs to be drawn in and say, okay, well, what is actually within? And it's really important. It's really interesting, sorry, when you keep saying, I need evidence and I need confirmation, right? And not everything in life is going to give you that evidence, and not everything in life is going to give you that confirmation. But you still need to develop a sense of security, and you still need to feel safe. And this is the important part, especially in relationships. That a person who constantly feels in angst or anxious with an intolerance of uncertainty is because that person's not healed. There's an actual wound. And if you don't actually heal as an individual on many levels, you're going to carry that wound into every present moment, and you're also going to carry it into the new relationship.
Yeah.
So sometimes you really need to put yourself in a situation to actually change the cycle. So you need to confront the situation, and that's part of healing as well, is confronting that situation that, right now I'm at a point in my life and I don't know where it's heading. I don't know what's going to happen. I do have these plans. I want to become a doctor, and I want to do this, and I want to go to university, and I'd like to open up my own practice and so forth, right? So you can have those plans, right? But then you're in this predicament or in this relationship where you're like, okay, this is the time of any relationship where I run. I just turn and run because I'm wounded, right? And I'm unhealed. So I can't deal with the uncertainty, and I need security, and I need confirmation that this relationship or this person really loves me, and it's going to work, and we're going to live happily ever after, right?
So what should I do? Because that's me. That's me.
You need to change the cycle, right? So here you are. You're at this position again, right? You keep getting to this same position, and the first thing that your mind and body says, run. So you pick yourself up and run. But what have you done? You've actually just conditioned the cycle again, right? You
Mm-hmm.
haven't done anything different. As Einstein says, you know, you can't keep doing the same thing trying to yield out different results, because that's insanity, right?
Yeah.
In order for you to get something different, you need to do something different.
Yeah.
So when you reach that point of uncertainty and it's really intolerable, you actually have to stay there. You need to change the cycle. You need to change the thoughts. You need to change the memory. You need to change. And you can't actually do that because you're looking for evidence in order for that to change, because you don't want to change your mindset first, right? You're looking for the evidence in the world so that way your mind can actually accept it, right? So if you're looking for evidence and you want confirmation, that is performed by action,
Yeah.
right? So you
Mm-hmm.
need the action to say, okay, well, I can accept that and I feel really safe now, right?
Yeah.
Rather than saying, I feel really safe and I can go anywhere and do anything and get through anything.
Yeah.
So you can't run. You actually have to push through it. You have to push forward. And by pushing forward, you're going to learn new behavior patterns. You're going to learn new thought patterns. So anything that's old is actually going to immediately break, because now you're going to say, oh, hold on, there's no evidence to any of that, so I can't hold on to that anymore. It's not
I,
true. It's no longer true.
I agree. So I guess the first step is like, I think it's important
Acknowledgement.
to acknowledgement is always the first step, I think. Yeah. And then also getting into touch with the narratives that are going on, like the particular narratives, um, so that you can challenge them. One of the narratives I find hard to get over is the narrative of, if it's a relationship, um, how do I know that this is like a good person for me, or the right person, or the one, or whatever? Like my mind just gets into like, you know, how do I know that this person, like, how do I know?
This is a really, really important point. And I find this really common with a lot of individuals across the board. Gut instinct is really important. Intuition, gut instinct, that gut feeling is really
Mm,
important. And I think that individuals get it mixed up, because anxiety and intuition, they kind of think, oh, well, that feels the same. Because when you get that gut feeling that something just doesn't feel right, it feels like anxiety, feels
hmm
like that angst in your stomach that's just sitting there, right? So you need to be able to know the actual difference. You know, is it my intuition or is it my anxiety? Now, you can only really tap into your intuition when you're very present in the moment and you're at complete peace,
mm.
right? The minute that you start thinking of the future, or your mind starts wandering off, that's your anxiety. You got to learn how to know the difference,
So the
right?
intuition that came in with my last, like this relationship I was just in, was like, this girl was like, my gut feeling was that this girl's a really nice person. I can see that I can tell like she's just nice, kind, like kind of not like malicious. Like that was my gut feeling. Um, like someone who I can talk to, like would be like have a good conversation. She's intelligent. Um, so I had those gut feelings about those things. I was like, okay, I feel safe to proceed with with those things. So they kind of quash a few of my concerns. But then the other gut feelings of like questions of like, you know, am I super attracted to her? I didn't feel that attraction. Um, so for example, a question like that, or that, like, there was no dangers that I was perceiving, but like there was a few intuitions about some things. And then the absence of intuition about those things, it made me feel like I need to question, you know, oh, like, should I be feeling this, you know, attraction? Like, does this mean that it's not the right person and stuff like that? So there was a bit of intuition, and there was a bit of uncertainty and a lack of intuition. And no matter what, I couldn't really get those
But I look, physical attraction is really important because that's where it all starts, right? But that doesn't mean that if you're not physically attracted to someone that you really get along with and you have really intelligent conversations with and you feel really safe, right? That doesn't mean you get rid of that person or you rid yourself, right, out of the situation, because you could still become friends and stay friends or build some type of relationship, and you can just see how it goes, or some type of friendship. But yes, physical attraction is really, really important.
Yeah.
But it's not based on intuition.
Right. You mean sexual attraction, obviously.
Yeah, like sexual attraction.
It's more like there's no intuition there. It's just like
that's not based. That's just
it's electricity.
you're attracted to something.
Yeah.
You know, this is it. Like, you know, oh, I really like him. He's really handsome, or I really like her look, or I really like his look.
It's a different feeling to intuition, and it's funny. It does happen more in your like. It's more fiery. It's more. It's
Well,
more in the look.
that's that passion and that's that desire.
Yeah.
That's activating different parts of your brain. It's not
Yes.
activating the fight or flight response.
No.
Yeah.
And it's not acting. It's not activating, like maybe intuition and those kind of things are activating parts of the brain that are closer to the rational parts of the brain. And so they kind of are mixed in with kind of like an evaluative kind of part of them, whereas that attraction is very, it's almost like it doesn't have much thinking behind it. It just is kind of on or off.
It's quite impulsive as well, because
Yeah.
when you look at something beautiful or when you see something that you're really attracted to, your actual rational takes a holiday. It's not really rationally thinking. It is more impulsive and it is more desirable, motivated by desire.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing. But I think the most important thing is if an individual is stuck in those kind of scenarios, that's obviously a pattern. It's an unhealthy pattern.
Mm.
And need to change the cycle, and thereby that person needs to heal from so many things. And that's why self-acknowledgement or that introspection, you need to really take a good look. What's going on? Where has this actually come from? What are my wounds? What am I not healed from?
Mm.
You know? And it can be as simple as facing your fear or having that conversation with that one person, and you've actually healed from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's not a long process. It really
Yeah.
depends on the person and situation. You know, I was talking to a girlfriend of mine yesterday, and she was telling me about the tumultuous relationship she has with her mother. And what I picked up from that is that the mother is not healed from her childhood trauma, and now my friend is not healed from the trauma that she experienced from her mother. And I said to her, now it's really up to you. You need to heal your wound, and by doing that, you're going to heal your mother's wound.
Mm.
So you need to do things differently, and that's actually how it works. So rather than, you know, cussing your mother or like cutting her out of your life, that's not the way. That just says something like, that just means that you're very unhealed because you're taking offense to everything. You see, a healed person would not take offense. They wouldn't even notice if you were being rude to them.
Yeah.
Because that's how healed they are. But if an unhealed person, they take offense to almost everything. Why did you say that? That really hurt my feelings. But that doesn't come from you. It actually comes from something from their past that they actually haven't dealt with. And that's why it's really important to stay in those situations where you fear the most, because that's where your growth is going to come from. You're actually going to grow.
So, yeah. So from a very practical perspective, I feel like there's two practical steps that can be done. Firstly is so you identify the narrative, and then you use factual, kind of thought challenging, taking different perspectives, that might devalidate that narrative or make another narrative more truthful?
Just tell yourself, don't assume.
Yeah, see, I'm not as simple as that. Doesn't that
But
like
that's a simple, right? And that's all you really need to do, because it's not really that hard. See, the hard part is the doing part,
hmm,
right? Thoughts, your brain is plastic. You can change the neuroplasticity of your brain over time. So if you keep saying to yourself, don't assume, I actually don't know. So I'm going to choose to actually let that go. Because I actually don't know. And I'm not going to, you can't bother yourself with something that you actually don't know, because then you get stuck. And then you're creating another neural pathway that's really unhealthy. So you need to
hmm,
look for the most simple things, because they're the things that are actually going to work. Doesn't,
yeah.
and sometimes people like the hard way because they're actually conditioned that I need to work really, really, really hard and sacrifice all these things, because then that would mean that I'm a hard worker.
For me, yeah, for me, like the narrative is like the more I think about something, the more I'll understand the moving parts, and that won't just help me in this situation, it will help me in so many different situations. So I justify the complexity of my, thought around those things that you're saying should be simple. How, like, if I wanted to change that, how would I change that? Because yeah, I write for ages about something simple because I see this moving part and this connects to that and and I like that. There's something that likes that and justifies that, and that's why it keeps on happening. And I find it impossible to be simple about those things.
You need to be really present in the moment. See, when you can write a lot, that means that your mind wanders off, and it's a misuse of the imagination,
Hmm.
right? And you find yourself getting really lost down the rabbit hole, and it's not necessary, right? But the only reason, maybe possibly, I could be wrong, is that you do that is because it serves comfort,
It
right?
serves a goal of mine that is like I want to know everything, and I want to, because for example, like one thing in my
See
mind right
that
now,
narrative, I'm just going to stop you there. So see that narrative, I want to know everything.
I want to know as much as I possibly can.
If you can reframe that, um, every day I'm learning, and I'm going to learn lots of things, and I'm going to learn a lot of things along the way. So there's no
Yeah,
orientation to time, space,
yeah.
person, weather, time of life, right? Because if you're saying, I want to know everything,
So
you're
the
actually
narrative that comes after that for me is
quite overwhelmed.
no, you're completely correct. And then, so yeah, I'm learning every day, blah 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 blah. And then the narrative that comes for me is like I want to be the best. Like I want to be the fastest. It needs to be quicker. This is not quick enough. If I'm just learning, going about, and just trust that I'm learning, it's
Yeah.
not enough.
But do you see that narrative? I want to be the best, and it's not quick enough.
Hmm.
That's the narrative that needs to be looked at,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Because what you're actually doing, you're creating more angst and anxiety, because in your mind, you're running out of time,
Yes.
right? So if you extract that and you say something like, time is on my side,
Mm.
right?
Hmm.
And I'm going to learn things, different things, and new things at the right time, as I actually go by day. So you're not creating a level of expectation for yourself. You're not feeling overwhelmed and so pressured by time,
Mm.
right? Because it's almost like you're in a rush to nowhere, because everyone gets the same 24 hours in a day. No one gets anything different, right? Everyone gets the same 24 hours in a day. It's just that, how am I going to manage my 24 hours? So even if you learn one thing during the day, that's brilliant. But just actually accept that, rather than criticize and say, I only learned one thing and that's not good enough, and You know, I need to know more, and I
Comes
need
down, I think, to beliefs and goals. Like the goal, the beliefs come before the goals. But like, for example, I think my goal to, like, let's say, be the fastest at something, at learning something, or know the most about something, that drives me to believe that the more pressure I put on myself, the more I'm going to come closer to that goal. And therefore, I validate that and I justify that. It has, in my belief system, it's what I have to do because I'm going to reach my goal. And everyone wants to reach their deepest goals. But that goal might be developed from an unhealthy place. For example, watching the rush of society, competition at school, like, and the praise of the person who does the best or whatever, So something deep down, the narrative that, whatever narrative someone has, that's my narrative. Whatever narrative someone has and the goals that they strive for, and if they are experiencing a certain level of anxiety that is not, that they'd rather not have, there seems to be a conflict between the person, me, who doesn't want this anxiety, but then these goals that are like, it's almost like I have to be anxious in order to get those goals. But it's like, how do you find, maybe there's like a middle line where you can move towards those goals in a healthy way.
but you can achieve your goals in a healthy way, right? And like I mentioned earlier, you've conditioned yourself to believe that I need to feel this way in order to reach my goal. And that's you just conditioning yourself. And what actually happens when you overwhelm the brain with that much anxiety and that much pressure, yeah, you do actually reach that target point, or you do reach those goals, but you actually didn't enjoy the journey, and you probably didn't learn much along the way, right? Because people become so preoccupied with an outcome and a result, right, that they forget the present moment from day to day. But that's what really builds you. That's your building block. And that's why it's really important to really slow down and be consciously aware and be fully present in the moment and allow yourself freedom and say things to yourself like, time is on my side and I am going to learn in a very, peaceful, amicable, timely manner.
And it will be enough,
It will be exactly enough because you will attain your goals just in a different way.
Do you think it's good? Like, one thing that I think might help with that is like, you look back when you're like 80 or whatever, and you think, or you genuinely feel into what is genuinely important. And whether, if I'm older, let's say I believe that I have to achieve all these things in order for me to be a content person when I'm older. I think there's this thing inside that it's like, if I don't, then when I am 80 or 90, I'll look back on my life and not be content. But is that necessarily true? I might actually look back and like the things that I thought were really important might not be that important. And like, yeah.
The important thing is you need to remember you're not there yet. So you don't need to think about it. You don't know how you're going to think or feel at 80.
But I think that's what drives the angst.
Yeah, but you need to then just be fully present in the moment and enjoy your life each day as it comes. Have your life goals, you can have your achievements, you can have everything organized and set up. But you can't be preoccupied with the thought, I wonder what I'm going to be like when I'm 80, looking back at my life. Am I going to be satisfied or dissatisfied?
It's not like a conscious thought, it's more subconscious.
And you need to get rid of it because it's not serving you. It doesn't help you. It doesn't serve you, right? It's taking you way into the future and you're not. You're here. This is where you are. This is the only moment of truth. This is the only real moment in your life. This moment right now, right? It's impossible, again, to deal with something that hasn't happened, that you're not there yet. You can't deal with it. It's like saying, Joshua, I'd like to, let's go out for lunch to this restaurant, and you've never been there before. and all day you just keep thinking, what am I going to order? What am I going to eat? Right? But you're not there yet. You don't know what's on the menu. You don't
Yeah.
know what the specials of the day. But, you know, so again, you can't be preoccupied with things that actually don't exist. But when you get to the restaurant, you're going to know for sure. And that's a sure thing. And that's that confirmation. You're going to have the menu right in front of you. And you're going to read it and you think, oh, I really like this and I like this. And what's this dish? Right? And then you can order.
Mm.
So then the whole time that you were thinking about this lunch, what you're going to have for lunch, you've missed 4 or 5 hours of really good work or learning,
Yeah.
being present. Do you understand?
Oh,
So
I completely understand.
that's the waste of time. That's the waste of time.
I feel like what also comes into it is the ability to make decisions in the moment. Because if if you feel anxiety when you see a menu because you don't know what you're going to order,
Mm.
something in you is going to be like, well, I know
That,
it happens for me. I need to prepare. Like if I prepare,
but that means, yeah, that means you're too preoccupied and not really present in the moment. And it's really, really important to enjoy every present moment because that's the only thing that really exists.
mm, yeah, it's interesting. I feel like I enjoy, like I'm very happy, but like underneath, just because my mind is so in the future, there's always like a small sense of angst, you know, and it does. I feel like the more I work on these kind of things, the more that happiness comes through. But yeah, there is a sense of like angst deep down there that feels so deep. It's literally everything we've talked about. Those are the beliefs I have, you know, deep down. It's like I have to move quicker, like I have to achieve all these things, and the thing is, I love doing that. You know, I love thinking about complex problems and blah 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 blah. So it's like, but I feel like, yeah, I feel like there's this middle place where somehow you can that is who I am, or potentially who I am, like my brain and the way it works and the type of things that I like, but somehow doing that in a healthy way. Um, yeah. And the only thing that's coming in the way of that is a sense of the only way to do it is to go as quick as possible and to put as much pressure as possible and to be, because that's how I'm going to be as the best I can be. But I think maybe getting into situations where, and then reflecting on them, where the evidence or the reality of what happens is, for example, you approach a very important thing to you, like that's a complex problem or whatever it is you like, but you approach it with a healthy, clear mind, as opposed to like almost like planning a little bit, but also just chilling, enjoying, versus like planning heaps, thinking about every single scenario, feeling really like, oh yeah, I've intellectualized everything really well, and kind of just purposely doing the opposite or something that's different to that, and then seeing the result of that and potentially weighing up that result against doing that in a very stressful way, maybe feeling like, you know, for example, in this conversation, I'm feeling very stimulated, but at the same time, I'm also feeling quite like on edge and like stressed a little bit. It's like maybe next time I can test chilling, you know, because I feel like this has been a great conversation. We've
Mm.
explored things and it's been super interesting and intellectual and stuff like that. But for me, maybe I could try next time doing this conversation a bit more relaxed, and just test out what the result is. Maybe it won't be so but maybe I'll enjoy it more, and maybe that will give me kind of evidence and motivation to like move towards that way of operating a bit more versus the stressful, intense, like quick part of myself. I don't know. That's the only way I see of potentially
Well,
shifting.
yeah, that's what I was mentioning, that you need to do things in a different way because you've got to really rule out those confirmation biases in your brain that you have. And
It.
you want to put them wrong because they're not serving you and they're really negative.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. I think to wrap it up almost like, yeah, that's what I was coming at. Firstly, it's changing the narrative. And the second practical step is just doing things differently. It's change. It's like, um, yeah, just to take it back to that scenario, if you're like, you have a pattern and in a relationship, you always do the same thing, um, just doing things completely differently. It doesn't mean being a crazy person and like, running around naked because that's different, but it's more like, if I usually bail from the situation, and I usually become really, in my head or something like that, something different might be like, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to play golf every day because, or play golf twice a week because that's just different. I'm changing like, it might not be the correct thing, but I guess maybe when you like what I'm thinking, and this is how I'm summarizing it, I might be not correct, but it's like just doing things differently doesn't matter what it is, it's somehow helpful because it's like
And
changes your brain.
it's just a distraction, but if you're running away from that girl, you need to actually stay in that situation long enough.
Right.
You need to actually stay there and do things differently, irrespective of the outcome, whether you end up having a relationship or not. That's
Yes.
not what you're preoccupied with.
That's not the goal. Yeah.
That's not the goal. The goal is for you to actually heal, enjoy the present moment, um, because obviously this person allows you to experience joy, and comfort, and you like those stimulating conversations. So you need to stay in that situation long enough where you actually feel safe with uncertainty. You need to feel safe in the world
Mm.
without certainty.
Mm.
And that's what you need to work on.
Mm. Agreed.
Okay.
That's good.